What if the character you spent years dismissing as a bully was actually one of the most tragically written figures in modern fiction? Welcome back to the channel. Today we are diving deep into someone who deserves far more than a surface level reading, Draco Malfoy. For many viewers, he was simply the sneering antagonist standing opposite Harry Potter, the privileged villain audiences love to hate. But beneath that cold exterior lies a character study rich with psychological tension, moral conflict, and genuine heartbreak. Draco Malfoy is not simply a bad person. He is a person shaped by bad systems, bad influences, and impossible circumstances. This video is not here to excuse his actions, it is here to understand them. Because understanding Draco means understanding something deeply human about how environment, expectation, and fear can define a person long before they ever get the chance to define themselves. Draco Malfoy makes his entrance long before the Hogwarts Express ever leaves the station. Harry Potter first crosses paths with him at Madame Malkin's robe shop in Diagon Alley, where a pale, pointed-faced boy immediately launches into conversation about Quidditch, family status, and the sorting of certain wizarding families. It is a brief encounter, but it plants a seed. Then comes Hogwarts. Draco strides into the story with an air of absolute entitlement, publicly insulting Hagrid, dismissing Hermione as a muggle-born, and attempting to position himself as someone Harry should naturally want to befriend. When Harry refuses his handshake, a rivalry is born. What is striking about this introduction is how deliberately crafted it is. Rowling does not ease audiences into Draco's arrogance. She presents it fully formed, loud, and unapologetic, making him instantly memorable as someone whose confidence masks something far more complicated underneath. To truly understand Draco Malfoy, you have to understand where he came from. The Malfoy family wasn't just wealthy, they were a dynasty built on pure blood supremacy, dark connections, and centuries of accumulated power. Growing up in Malfoy Manor meant growing up surrounded by dark artifacts, elitist ideology, and the constant message that magical bloodlines determined a person's worth. Draco was raised in a household where Muggle-borns were referred to with contempt, where Voldemort's name was spoken with reverence rather than fear, and where social status was treated as sacred. His worldview wasn't something he independently developed, it was handed to him before he was old enough to question it. Every value Draco carried into Hogwarts, his arrogance, his disdain for those he considered inferior, his obsession with blood purity, was a direct reflection of what his family celebrated. He didn't choose those beliefs, he inherited them. At the heart of Draco's dysfunction stands one figure above all others, his father, Lucius Malfoy. Cold, calculating, and obsessed with status, Lucius never offered Draco warmth or unconditional love. Instead, he offered something far more dangerous. Conditional approval. Every compliment came wrapped in expectation. Every moment of pride was tied to performance, reputation, and bloodline superiority. Draco grew up understanding that love had to be earned and that failure was simply not tolerated in the Malfoy household. This created a boy who was simultaneously arrogant and deeply insecure, projecting confidence outward while quietly craving validation from a father who measured worth in power and prestige. You can see it in how desperately Draco name drops his father throughout the early books. "My father will hear about this" became almost a catchphrase, but beneath the threat was a child seeking relevance through borrowed authority. Lucius did not raise a villain, he raised a boy terrified of disappointing him, and that fear became the quiet engine driving nearly every conflict Draco would face throughout the entire series. While Lucius ruled through expectation, Narcissa Malfoy operated through something far more powerful, unconditional love. Where his father offered approval only when Draco performed, his mother offered protection simply because he existed. This distinction is not subtle in the narrative. It is everything. Narcissa's devotion to Draco transcends her loyalty to Voldemort, to pure blood ideology, and even to her own safety. When she approaches Severus Snape in Half-Blood Prince, desperate and trembling, she is not acting as a Death Eater. She is acting as a mother terrified of losing her son. This dynamic creates a fascinating emotional contrast within Draco's upbringing. He was simultaneously starved of unconditional fatherly validation while being quietly anchored by maternal love. And in Deathly Hallows, that anchor saves his life. Narcissa's lie to Voldemort about Harry's death is perhaps the most quietly heroic moment in the entire series. In the earlier books, Draco Malfoy presents himself as Harry Potter's most persistent tormentor. His rivalry with Harry begins almost immediately, rooted not in personal grievance but in wounded pride after Harry rejected his friendship. From there, Draco becomes a consistent source of cruelty, targeting Hermione with slurs like mudblood, mocking Ron's poverty, and using his prefect status and family name as weapons. But here's what makes these moments worth examining more carefully. Draco was not born cruel, he was taught to be. Every insult he hurled echoed language he heard at the dinner table. Every act of superiority mirrored behaviors modeled by Lucius. His bigotry was inherited, his arrogance rehearsed. This does not excuse his actions. Hermione's pain was real. The harm he caused mattered. But understanding Draco means recognizing that his early villainy was less about who he was and more about who he had been shaped to become. Now, when we talk about Draco's social circle, it's tempting to call Crabbe and Goyle his friends, but look closer, and that word starts to feel hollow. These weren't friendships built on mutual respect or genuine affection. They were alliances rooted in social hierarchy and loyalty, maintained through intimidation. Crabbe and Goyle functioned more as enforcers than companions, following Draco not because they cared for him, but because he represented power and status within Slytherin. Draco never truly confided in them, never showed vulnerability around them, and honestly, why would he? They weren't equals, they were extensions of his image, and that's the tragic part. Beneath all that arrogance and posturing, Draco was profoundly isolated. He surrounded himself with people who feared or admired his family name, never experiencing the kind of real connection that Harry found with Ron and Hermione. His confidence was always a performance masking a deeply lonely boy. Everything begins shifting in Goblet of Fire. Voldemort's return isn't just a threat to Harry Potter, it's a direct disruption to the carefully constructed world the Malfoys have always dominated. For the first time, Draco's arrogance starts carrying an undercurrent of unease. The family's influence, once untouchable, suddenly feels fragile. In Order of the Phoenix, that fragility becomes more visible. Lucius Malfoy's arrest and imprisonment after the Department of Mysteries battle strips the family of its most powerful protector. The Malfoy name, which had always opened doors and silenced critics, begins losing its weight. Draco arrives at Hogwarts no longer projecting pure confidence, but something closer to desperation masked as cruelty. These books are crucial because they showed Draco transitioning from a privileged bully into something more complicated. The armor is still there, but the cracks are forming, and what lies beneath is far more vulnerable than anyone expected. Half-Blood Prince is where Draco Malfoy's story transforms completely. Voldemort assigns him a mission that no 16-year-old should ever face: kill Albus Dumbledore, the most powerful wizard alive, or watch his entire family be destroyed. This is not a villain receiving a promotion. This is a terrified boy being handed an impossible death sentence dressed up as an honor. Throughout the book, Draco works in desperate isolation, unable to confide in anyone, carrying a weight that visibly crushes him. He cannot ask his father for help because Lucius is imprisoned in Azkaban. He cannot show weakness without risking his family's lives. For the first time, Rowling strips away every layer of Draco's arrogance and exposes what was always underneath: a frightened child who never truly chose the path he was walking. This is the moment audiences stop seeing a bully and start seeing a trapped human being. The Astronomy Tower scene is perhaps the most defining moment in Draco Malfoy's entire arc. Standing before Dumbledore, wand raised, Draco finally has everything Voldemort demanded of him within reach, and yet he cannot. His hand trembles, his voice breaks. He talks, stalls, and searches for any reason to delay the inevitable. This is not the behavior of a committed villain. This is a terrified boy confronting the full weight of a choice he never truly wanted to make. What makes this moment so powerful is what it exposes. Beneath all the cruelty, the arrogance, and the years of performing superiority, Draco is fundamentally not a killer. His conditioning told him to hate. His conscience refused to follow through. Dumbledore even acknowledges this, speaking to Draco with gentleness rather than fear, recognizing that the boy pointing that wand was already lost, already desperate for someone to offer him a way out. Throughout Half-Blood Prince, Draco Malfoy is barely recognizable. The arrogant, sharp-tongued boy who once strutted through Hogwarts corridors with effortless confidence is replaced by someone gaunt, hollow-eyed, and visibly unraveling. Rowling is deliberate in this transformation. She wants readers to see the cost written directly onto his body. Harry notices it repeatedly. Draco loses weight. His skin turns ashen. He looks like someone carrying a burden that is slowly crushing him from the inside out. This physical deterioration is not accidental storytelling. Rowling uses Draco's appearance as a mirror for his psychological state. He cannot sleep. He cannot eat. He is a 16-year-old boy tasked with committing murder or watching his entire family be destroyed. There is no glory in his mission, no excitement, no villainous satisfaction. There is only fear, exhaustion, and the creeping realization that there may be no way out alive. The Vanishing Cabinet was not simply a clever plot device. It was the physical manifestation of everything Draco was carrying. Spending an entire year secretly repairing it inside the Room of Requirement, Draco worked in isolation, driven not by loyalty to Voldemort, but by the desperate need to protect his family from consequences he never chose. When he finally succeeded in using it to smuggle Death Eaters into Hogwarts, the moment carried almost no triumph. There was no celebration, no pride, just a pale, exhausted boy who had done something irreversible. Rowling frames this accomplishment with unmistakable moral weight. Draco completed the task, yes, but the reader never forgets why. Every step he took through that cabinet corridor was a step taken under threat of death for himself and his parents. His success was not villainy, it was survival dressed in the clothes of obedience. By the time Deathly Hallows begins, Draco Malfoy is no longer a bully with power. He is a prisoner in his own home surrounded by Death Eaters who treat Malfoy Manor like their personal headquarters. The family that once commanded respect now lives in fear, stripped of dignity and forced to host Voldemort's inner circle. One of the most telling moments comes when Harry, Ron, and Hermione are captured and brought to Malfoy Manor. Draco is asked to identify Harry. He hesitates. He looks directly at the boy he has tormented for years and deliberately gives an uncertain answer. He does not confirm what he almost certainly knows. That single moment of hesitation speaks volumes. It is not heroism, but it is resistance. Quiet, careful, and deeply human resistance. Draco is not embracing Voldemort's cause. He is simply trying to survive it without losing whatever remains of his conscience. Picking up from Draco's hesitation at Malfoy Manor, the Room of Requirement scene in Deathly Hallows presents another defining moment for his character. When Draco, Crabbe, and Goyle corner Harry inside the Room of Requirement, Draco makes a telling choice. Rather than attempting to kill Harry outright, he insists on delivering him alive to Voldemort. On the surface, this reads as strategy, but beneath it lies something more revealing. Draco is still trying to navigate a path that avoids direct murder. He is not reaching for cruelty, he is reaching for an exit. His visible discomfort throughout the confrontation, the tension in his posture, the uncertainty in his voice, signals a boy still fighting his own conscience. Even surrounded by Crabbe and Goyle, Draco never fully commits to darkness. That restraint, however small, speaks volumes about the moral complexity Rowling carefully embedded within him across every critical moment. During the Battle of Hogwarts, something quietly remarkable happens. The Malfoy family walks away from Voldemort's side, not with a dramatic declaration, but simply because Narcissa calls out for Draco and he runs to her. There is no ideology driving that moment, no sudden moral awakening or heroic speech, just a mother and son choosing each other over everything else. And that choice says everything about where Draco's true loyalty always lived. Not in Voldemort's vision of pure blood supremacy, not in the Death Eater cause his family publicly championed for years, but in the three people who made up his entire world. Lucius, Narcissa, and Draco Malfoy were never true believers. They were survivors who had tied themselves to a dangerous power and spent years desperately trying to escape the consequences. At his core, Draco never fought for a cause. He fought for his family, and in that final battle, so did they. Draco Malfoy's journey ultimately serves a purpose far greater than one character's redemption arc. He becomes a mirror held up to society itself, reflecting how hatred is not something we are born with, but something carefully taught, reinforced, and rewarded within certain systems. Draco never chose his family, his beliefs, or the world he was handed. He was shaped by generations of pure blood ideology, by a household where cruelty was normalized and compassion was weakness. The nature versus nurture debate finds one of fiction's most compelling case studies in him. What makes Draco so haunting is the question he leaves behind. Given different parents, a different home, different values instilled from childhood, who might he have become? His story forces us to examine how privilege and indoctrination work together, quietly corrupting potential, closing minds before they ever had the chance to open. That is not just his tragedy. It is a deeply human one. Draco Malfoy fits comfortably within a long tradition of morally gray characters who captivate audiences precisely because they resist easy categorization. Think of Zuko from Avatar: The Last Airbender, Jaime Lannister from Game of Thrones, or even Shakespeare's Edmund from King Lear. These are figures shaped by broken systems, parental failure, and inherited cruelty who nonetheless carry within them the capacity for something better. What makes Draco particularly compelling is that his redemption never arrives in a grand cinematic moment. There is no heroic sacrifice, no dramatic speech. His arc is quieter, more uncomfortable, and ultimately more honest. Audiences sympathize with him not because he earns it through noble deeds, but because they recognize something painfully human in his struggle. He is a boy who never truly chose his path, and that tension between inherited identity and personal conscience is something every generation instinctively understands and feels deeply. While Rowling gave Draco his complexity on the page, it was Tom Felton who breathed a haunting humanity into him on screen. Wow. What could have easily become a one-note performance of sneering villainy became something far more nuanced in Felton's hands. From the earliest films, Felton layered Draco with subtle insecurity beneath the arrogance, letting audiences glimpse the frightened boy hiding behind the polished Malfoy facade. But it was in Half-Blood Prince where Felton truly delivered something extraordinary. His physical transformation, the hollowed eyes, the trembling hands, the moments of silent breakdown in the bathroom scene communicated a psychological collapse that words alone could not fully capture. Directors and cinematographers also made deliberate choices isolating Draco visually, framing him in shadow, separating him from crowds to reinforce his growing alienation. Felton himself has spoken openly about his deep affection for Draco, and that genuine emotional investment translated directly onto screen, making the character's quiet suffering impossible to ignore. After the war, Draco's life was far from easy. Pottermore reveals that he struggled deeply with his identity, distancing himself from pure blood circles and eventually marrying Astoria Greengrass, a woman who had rejected blood supremacy entirely. This choice alone speaks volumes about how much Draco had quietly evolved. Then came Scorpius, and fatherhood became Draco's most honest mirror. The Cursed Child shows a Draco who is emotionally clumsy but genuinely trying, a man desperate not to repeat his own father's coldness. He wants to be present in ways Lucius never was for him. What makes this arc so powerful is its restraint. Draco never delivers grand speeches about redemption. Instead, his growth shows up in small, tender moments with his son, in choosing love over legacy. He does not become a hero, he simply becomes more human, and perhaps that is enough. Draco Malfoy endures because he reflects something deeply uncomfortable and deeply true about human nature. He was never purely evil, and he was never quite redeemed. He existed in the space between those two things, and that is exactly where real people live. His story asks a question that stays with you long after the final page. How much of who we are is chosen, and how much is simply inherited? Draco was handed a world built on cruelty and called it privilege. He carried that weight visibly, cracking under it in ways that made him impossible to dismiss. What makes him compelling is not a dramatic, heroic turn, but the quieter truth that he stopped, hesitated, and chose differently in small but meaningful moments. In a series full of extraordinary magic, Draco Malfoy remains one of its most human creations, and that is why he will never be forgotten.